Hello, it's Dawn Michelle and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about all the things that I got up to in October of 2024. So talk about some of the memories, we'll take a look at my planners, talk primarily about my tarot practice, the decks that I worked with, some of the journals that I work in, and things of that nature. As always, there'll be timestamps so you can jump around to any piece or part of this video. So let's jump into memories first. I've got my handy dandy planner. I've gone through a couple of different iterations with planners. In October, I was playing with planners. So I got myself a Hobonichi Cousins and I played with that a little bit, just seeing if that was maybe something that I wanted to do in 2025. Wow, that's amazing. That's coming up so soon. And I played with that and I enjoyed it. You'll see that reflected in my tarot journals because I was kind of playing in that instead of playing in my tarot journals for most of the month. I ended up back in my Hobonichi weeks. I put a new cover on it and it's still the same old hot mess of things that it always is. So a couple of big things actually happened in October in my personal life. So October is my husband and I's anniversary. So we went to Maui for a week. It was beautiful. We did the road to Hana, which was great, also slightly scary. And we had a really good time. I did end up getting sick and we had to come home early, but it was still a wonderful vacation. So prior to that, we ended up with a puppy. That was kind of a big thing. It's fitting. The moment the kids all move out of the house, which that happened a couple months ago, and we're empty nesters now, which is great. So of course we're going to get a puppy. Why wouldn't we? We didn't intend to get a puppy. It's just one of those things that happened. We were at the farmer's market a few weeks before we went to Hawaii. They happened to have a rescue dog adoption thing going on, and we just happened across this dog. It just happened. Anyway, it was a long process because he's a rescue and we had to go through a whole process, to adopt him. And we started that before we went to Hawaii. He came over, he met our other dog. We made sure that they were going to get along and that Tucker was going to be okay with having a new little brother who is twice his size. Anyway, it was a whole thing. We went to Hawaii, we came back, and we were able to bring Pascal home for the first time. And it's been wonderful ever since. I've forgotten how much work a puppy actually is, and he is a very large puppy with a lot of energy, but he's an amazing dog. Okay, so that was the really kind of big things that happened. Let's talk about a couple books that I finished reading in October. I finished reading Nettle and Bone, which is a wonderful, wonderful book. Highly recommend it. It is this great kind of cozy fantasy story. It was so good. And to the point where I am planning on getting some other books by T. Kingfisher, and because I'd like to read some more from that particular author. I did also finish reading Haunting Adeline. Finally, that's been kind of a long read. Super, super trigger warnings with that book. I was super disappointed by the way it ended. I'll just be honest. I was like, this is it? This is the end? Okay, cool. So that's my review. It was interesting and I hated the ending. So those were the two fiction books that I finished in October. Let's talk real quick about movies. I'd say TV shows, but we really haven't watched too much in the way of TV shows. We did finally watch Deadpool and Wolverine, which was fantastic. I'm a huge X-Men fan and I absolutely love Wolverine. And so seeing Deadpool and Wolverine together was great. I really, really enjoyed that movie. It was a lot of fun. We also watched the new Beetlejuice. So that's the second to the original that came out, when was that? 80s, 90s? I don't even remember. Always been a huge, huge fan of that movie and love Michael Keaton, Winona Ryder, of course. And it was so much fun to see them all come back together for the second movie. It was tons of fun. The nostalgia in it was great. We really, really enjoyed it. Also continuing our watching movies from the 90s thing that Kevin and I are doing. We watched Clueless, which Kevin had never seen before, although he kept thinking that he had, but he was actually talking about Legally Blonde, and I'm not sure why he's even seen that movie. But anyway, he had not seen it, even back in the day. So we watched that one, and that was fun. He really didn't like it, but that's okay. It was a fun one. So that's been kind of what we've been up to in movies. So for TV, we really don't watch a ton of TV most of the time. We're watching Critical Role, always Dimension 20. We're gamer nerds, so we watch a lot of gamer stuff. Speaking of video games, that's always the thing that's happening. There was an expansion that came out for Diablo 4 called Vessel of Hatred, I believe it is. So we created new characters and Kevin and I have been playing that. It's been lots of fun. I love Diablo. It is full on chaos. And then Lisa and I still have our normal stream stuff we're doing on my other channel. Lots of Baldur's Gate 3 stuff going on over there. We have a game now that we do every other weekend with, it's myself, Lisa Pepez, Krista from Krista Chronicles, and Allie from Tao Tarot, and the four of us get together and play Baldur's Gate 3, and it's loads of fun. It is complete chaos, but it's really interesting to have a full party of all real people. That's been really fun. So yeah, that's pretty much it for like books and movies and TVs and the memories and all the things. So let's go ahead and jump into the thing that you probably really want to hear about, which is the decks I worked with, and we'll take a look at my tarot journals. So starting off with the decks, we're going to start with the deck that I used primarily for like my daily draw practice. Now I use the term daily very loosely because I didn't actually pull cards every single day, but multiple times throughout a week I would just pull a single card from the Le Vampire Oracle to just get like a message for like the moment or for the day. What do I need to know today? What do I need to keep in mind? Or what do I need to know in this moment? I use daily draw type style pulls a lot of the time when I'm like transitioning and when I'm looking to move from sort of one state of being to another, as well as just when I need to take like a break, when I just need like a little mental reprieve from whatever is going on. So the Le Vampire Oracle is one of my favorites. I love this deck. It pairs really well with a lot of my sort of spooky season type tarot decks. And while I do use it a lot more during sort of the October, November spooky season, I do use this deck year round. I find the art to be really charming. I love these big eye girls. Okay, so like, disclaimer, I didn't at first. Like when these decks first started like hitting the market, I was like, oh no, I can't do the doll deck. That's just weird. And then I think I've talked about it before, the Nicoletta Ciccoli was kind of like my gateway deck into that sort of art style. I mean, the Ciccoli art is a little bit different than Jasmine Beckett Griffith art, but it's that same kind of doll-esque quality that we see in both artist style. And it really took me working with that deck very in depth to be able to work my way through that. I think I've done some videos on it. If you're interested, you can check them out. And that was kind of like my gateway. And then I think I got this one, was the next one that I got. And I just absolutely fell in love with it. I adore the artwork. I love this sort of fantasy gothic style in this one. All the keywords are really, really succinct. So we've got like this main keyword here, but then we also have these 3 additional keywords. And I've mentioned it many times before, and I love to use Oracle decks like this and then pull tarot for each of these 3 keywords. So if I got the Anti-Hero card, which is a card I actually got this month, then I would pull a tarot for Maverick, Risk Taker, and Rule Breaker, and that would give me a little bit more of some context and in-depth messaging around those particular keywords. I really love decks, Oracle decks that do that, because that central keyword there is kind of like the energetic focus of the reading. I'm pretty sure I've done videos on that too. I mean, at this point, after 5 years or so on TarotTube, I think I've pretty much done a video on just about everything nowadays. Except how I read tarot, because that video is apparently just a challenge for me. I've tried to make it several times, so maybe eventually. Anyway, I absolutely love this deck. I adore the art. I adore the way it reads. It pairs beautifully with so many of my spooky season decks, but I really just used it as a sort of daily draw for the month. Love this card. It's one of my favorite. I think I mention it every time. This is my Hecate card, and I adore it. Also, the guidebook. I know I don't talk about guidebooks a ton on my channel. I am a big lover of guidebooks. I love guidebooks. I just don't have a tendency to use them very often with tarot. I'm more inclined to use them with an oracle, although as I've mentioned 100 times before, like a broken record on my channel, I want the guidebook to support the deck. I don't want to be beholden to it, so I don't want to have to use it. In this particular guidebook though, each of the messages has kind of like a message from the character on the card, and I just really love that approach. And I love being able to use these like they are guides, like they are sharing this story, this information with me, whatever the case may be. And then we have this beautiful blessing at the end, which kind of just wraps up the message. We also have a curse, so if you're getting it in kind of like a shadow aspect, and then there's a little bit about working with the card. And I feel like this is like perfect. It's got just the right amount of information in it. I like the kind of unique aspect of having the character on the card speak to me, then getting that blessing and that curse, which I can look at one or the other or both if I'm looking at how that energy could be seen in both ways. I really, really enjoy that. And then the little working with the cards, which kind of just gives you something to like actively engage with as you're working with this deck. So I really enjoy the little guidebook for this deck, and I usually will get it out and at least read the message from the character on the card, so the card speaks section. And I love it. It's amazing. It's a really great way to not only start a day or end a day, but also just to kind of give you that little bit of a reprieve in between, tasks or busy times, or when things get a little bit overwhelming. Kind of just take a break, pull a card, get a message. And I absolutely love that practice. So next we have the other two decks that I probably used the most this month, because I just absolutely adore these decks together. So this little oracle here is I do this every time. It's either Beyond the Worlds or Between the Worlds. I think it's Beyond. I have heavily modified this deck. I have not only edged it and did this whole distress thing on it, but I also stamped the keywords. So this is one of those oracle decks where it just has like the item on it. So like tulip shell, raven, heart, devil head, cat. Okay, I'm coming across all the ones that I would have an immediate association to. But there's a lot of bones and doll parts in this deck that I don't have really any personal association to, like the doll's head, the jawbone, I see the doll's arm. So what I did is in the guidebook for this deck, which is amazing. I love the guidebook. But again, I felt like I was beholden to the guidebook. Like I couldn't work with the deck without the guidebook, and that's just not conducive to my personal tarot practice. So I went ahead and I just picked up these little like alphabet stamps at the craft store. I used some stays on stamps, so it is very, very permanent. And I just stamped the two keywords that were found in the guidebook, which are kind of these light and shadow aspects. And I love it. This deck is amazing now. I feel like the keywords should have been on the deck in the first place, but that's just my own personal thing. And now that it is in this format, I almost always use it to look at like where I'm at, what the thing is, and then looking at the light and shadow aspects of it. And the cards that I use with it, I will pull them on either side. And then most of the time I was dice casting over the top of this one. This is an amazing little deck. I really love it. I am working on building sort of personal association to the things that are in this deck. But the creator also has some wonderful insights in the guidebook as well. I mean, I don't discount the guidebook. I think it's great. It's just, I don't like when I have to use it because that's not always conducive to practice for me. And I paired it with my zombie tarot, which is like one of my ultimate favorite decks. I have edged this one as well, and I just absolutely love this deck. It's one of my favorites. It's such a great reader. It's so cheeky. It's so fun. I feel like a broken record talking about this one. I say the same things over and over again about it, but it's just one of those really solid decks that just consistently shows up. I get great readings with it. I really love the interpretations, and it's just a really fun one to work with. It is one that I tend to use a lot during spooky season, but this is one that I absolutely will pull out year round because I feel like it really does a great job of taking those really big ideas and those really big kind of concept energies and really breaking them down into something that's like a little bit more manageable, and also kind of gives me the opportunity to look at it from a different perspective and be like, hey, like, stop taking yourself so seriously. Like, it's cool, man. Everything's going to be okay. And like, I get that message a lot with this deck, which is amazing. So I pair these together a lot of the times. Like I said, I would put the oracle in the center, and then I would do the two tarot cards on either side. I also did quite a bit of dice casting with these two decks because they work really well together. The whole idea of the single focused oracle card in the center with the two keywords that I relate to the two tarot that I place on either side, looking at that central focus point in its kind of neutral state, and then looking at it its light state and its shadow state, and then adding the entire dice casting system over the top of it for kind of like the overarching energy of the reading. And for that practice, I just cast directly over the top of the cards. And then the dice, depending on where the dice fall, gives me an indication of how big of an influence that energy is in the card and in the reading. So when I cast over the top of my cards, the closer in the dice are to not only each other, but like when they land on the cards or really close to the cards, that to me signals the energy of that dice, the messaging of that dice is really potent. And the further out it gets, the less influence it has on the reading. And I really love working with it that way. It's not something I started off doing when I started doing the dice casting system and when Lisa and I created it, but it's definitely a practice that I've integrated into my dice casting, particularly when I'm doing a 3 card and I'm casting over the top of it. Then position becomes key in the reading as well. So these 2 decks together are just so much fun. Again, I love working with them in terms of, that single focus in the center, and then we have our light and shadow, and it works beautifully. I tend to, relate the keywords. I didn't always stamp them on the left or right. I kind of stamped them where there was room on the cards. And so I kind of just relate the keywords to whichever one it felt like it was talking about, or sometimes if it's top, it's on this side, and if it's bottom, it's this side. But that's not always like a hard and fast rule. Sometimes I switch it around because I don't always remember, right? I don't always remember what I, set out to do the first time, and I just kind of let it be an intuitive process. I adore these decks together. I feel like the bones and the doll parts just really lend a beautiful energy to working with the zombie tarot. And that's kind of funny to say because it is the bones and the doll parts that threw me about this oracle deck in the first place. But now that I've been working with it, now that I've been using it with the zombie tarot, I feel like it really, really works beautifully together. This is definitely one of those like matches made in heaven. I love using them. I get great messages. I love the way the keywords really relate back to the cards and the energy in the oracle and in the tarot. Like they're very cohesive, and I feel like they're speaking the same language, which is amazing. Definitely a favorite in my practice this month, and like I'm kind of sad to like even put them away, so I'm not sure that I will because I'm so enjoying working with them. And because dice are a huge part of my practice, I'll just show you real quick the dice that I used primarily with these. These dice usually sit right here. This is kind of like my main working set of dice for a lot of my personal practice stuff, like just kind of general personal practice. I have individual dice for individual things, and I have dice that relate to certain decks. These were the dice that I cast over the top of this particular pairing. These were originally my D&D set that I had that I used for my druid. This was her bone casting dice set, and this particular set has gone kind of like out of stock, I guess, or out of print. How do you say that with dice? It's no longer available. Like the creator's no longer making these. I'm sure you can find them elsewhere or something similar, but they look like bone. They're obviously not, but they look like bone, and they are just the most beautiful visual but also energetic match to this set. So I have actually taken them out of my D&D set, and I have put them in here because I feel like these really do lend themselves well to my practice and the things that I do and the kind of energies that I tend to work with. So another little pairing that I worked with quite a bit throughout the month of October was my Diablo Tarot and my Horror Tarot. And I did occasionally throw the Seasons of the Witch Samhain in there. I'll take a flip through that one here after these two, but really I did work with these two pretty exclusively together. Just on occasion, if I was doing a larger dice reading, I threw in the Samhain Oracle. So the Diablo Tarot I've talked about many times before. I did finally edge it. I've edged it in red. It's a favorite. I love this deck. I've like made a whole dedicated video talking about it because I think it's an excellent deck. I think it's an excellent reader. I am a gamer, so like I have played Diablo. I am currently playing the new Diablo, and I've played all of them like my whole adult life. So I have a very personal connection to this world and this lore, but I don't think that you need to have that in order to work with a deck. I think it's beautiful. It's got this really unique and interesting way that it approaches the tarot, and I really like the energy of it. I do, however, tend to mostly use it as like it was an oracle, meaning that I use it as a focal point in my reading. I am using the tarot associations though, as well as layering in lore, history, knowledge that I have that may relate from the game and from the world, but that's not necessarily required. But I tend to use it kind of like it's an oracle, and I set it in the center here. And then I paired that with the Horror Tarot actually, and I don't often pair. Here's the backs of this, and I have edged this one as well. I don't often pair tarot and tarot together, but these two decks just work really well. And I think because I'm using the Diablo Tarot as like a focal point, then this just kind of becomes like a basic 3-card reading when I'm doing it in that way. And like, it's beautiful. I really love this deck. I call this my Castlevania deck because, again, like gamer stuff, it feels like it sits in that world. It looks very similar to like the Castlevania Symphony of the Night game. I think the art is absolutely fantastic. I adore this art style. It reads really beautifully for me. My only quibble with this deck is the red foil text down at the bottom that is teeny tiny, and I can't read most of the time. However, I know this deck really well now, so most of the time I don't need the titles anymore, but it was kind of a challenge when I first started working with it. So I did break that down because the Diablo Tarot is one of the decks that is like, I make exception for. It is ridiculously huge. Not really sure why it's that big, but I make an exception for it. I love it anyway. Big bad boy that it is. So I'm working with these two decks together. Like I said, I used the Diablo Tarot as a focal point a lot of the time, meaning I just had that one single card in there in the reading, and it really sat kind of central and as like the main energy, the main focal point of the reading. It's kind of like the point, right? The underlying. And then I used the Horror Tarot to really flesh out around that. I did a lot of 3-card readings with it in that way. I also did dice casting over the top of it, similar to like I did with the 3-card readings with the Zombie Tarot and the Little Oracle. But I also did a couple of larger full 6-card dice casting readings. So I was using the Diablo Tarot as kind of like my central focal point. I pulled 4 of the Horror Tarot cards for specific energies to relate to the specific energies, which that comes from the dice itself. And then I ended up pulling in that Samhain Oracle as kind of like my takeaway message, my wrap up. And it worked beautifully for that. I laid all my cards down, kind of got the reading as the structure underneath. Then I cast my full set of dice, and I just cast it in my tray most of the time because I wasn't actually casting over the cards, because I was using the dice to kind of create the spread positions in a sense, even though I did that after the fact. If you're interested in learning more about dice casting, I do have a video, as well as Lisa has a video. The dice casting system is totally free. We created a free PDF. I'll leave a link for that below if you want to grab a copy of it for yourself. It's just a wonderful way to add a whole nother layer to your work. So these two together, like, I think they're just amazing. I love the way the Diablo Tarot is like super serious and like really dark and gritty, and then the Horror Tarot kind of in a sense lightens it up a little bit. It feels a bit more playful, and that's really interesting considering the name of the deck, the Horror Tarot, right? But also because if you had taken the Horror Tarot on its own outside of the Diablo Tarot, it probably would feel a bit darker, but when you pair it with this deck, it feels like it lightens things up. It feels like the horror version of the Zombie Tarot, if that makes sense. It's light, it's cheeky, it's fun. I really enjoy reading with it. And then when I pair it with that Diablo Tarot, I'm kind of getting that yin-yang energy, right? I'm getting the fun, I'm getting the lightheartedness, but I'm also getting the like, okay, here's the real serious work that you need to do, but then like also keep this in mind, and also like don't get too up in your head about it. Like, remember that, you know, things are fleeting. Everything is based on perspective, and I really love the way they work together. Adding the dice casting on top of that really allowed me to dive into that energy and to dive into the messaging. I think they're absolutely beautiful together. I use these two a lot outside of the spooky season, but again, they're beautiful for spooky season, right? They have all the spooky season energy. The Diablo Tarot I've worked with a lot. Like I said, I've made full-on video about it. I've talked about it many times in many other videos. It often shows up in my monthly practice videos because it is a deck that I use pretty much all the time. It sits out on my desk. It's like one of my main working decks, and I always have it available to me. I do pull cards when I'm playing Diablo. Okay, well, really after I play Diablo, because like Kevin gets a little irritated if I stop in the middle of a game to pull cards. You know, in all fairness, because it's a very fast-paced game, it's not like you can exactly pause it, right? So, like, in all fairness, I get it, but I love pulling cards after the fact to kind of look at the gameplay and to, you know, look at what happened in the game and maybe what I experienced and what I learned. I did a whole video for my members talking about working with tarot and hobbies and interests. So outside of really divination, although I did dive into that a little bit in that discussion, but I did talk a lot about working with tarot in terms of like with gaming or TV shows or movies or character driven stuff, things like that. So if you're interested and you're in my membership, I can definitely check that out. It was a fun one. And I did talk about it in terms of writing and journaling and things like that as well. But there was a whole little spiel about working with decks and games and how that really helps me as a tarot reader as well. So these two decks are amazing together. I absolutely love them. So then, of course, like I said, I also occasionally pulled the Seasons of the Witch Samhain Oracle into readings. This deck was also sitting on my desk throughout the month of October. It's not one that I got into too terribly often, but I did really enjoy pairing it and using it as a sort of wrap-up message for the readings when I was working particularly with these two. I think I did pull it on occasion for like just a daily card pull or just like an in the moment pull, but not very often. This is my favorite deck by this. I know there's a whole, like, I've got the Pokemon thing going on. I've got them all, or I've got them all on order. I can't even remember, but I will collect them all. This one is my favorite. I wasn't real fond of the changes that happened moving forward. I'm not real fond of the messages on this one. They're a little bit strangely worded, but I love the art. I love the imagery, and I love the energy that we get in these cards and the keywords that are on them. This one fits in so many different spaces in my practice. I use it for all kinds of things. It pairs beautifully with a lot of my decks, and it's one that I use year round. And it's probably by far the most used one that I have of this whole collection of decks. Second is probably the one with the bees, and I can never remember which one that is because I use that one a lot for creative work with my bee tarot. But this one is my most used one. I do keep it fairly close at hand so I can get into it at any time. And it pairs really beautifully with these two decks along with the vast majority of things in my collection. Okay, so real quick, we'll talk about the dice that I used with this particular pairing. This is actually my sort of Dark Urge Astarian set of dice. And I end up using it a lot in dice casting as well because it's got a great energy to it, and I have personal association to all of these types of dice and what they mean to me. I ended up using these ones. My Horror Tarot is still bleeding on my hands. Don't know when that's ever gonna stop. Lisa and I call these our Bloody Kisses dice, and like I think we have this exact same set because we both have played Dark Urge characters in BG3. This is where this came from, and this was the set of dice that I used, and it was beautiful with this whole combination. I often get into these dice when I'm doing dice casting and I'm using, you know, decks like the Notori and the Goetia, things that I've tied very specific energies into and work into, and I often get into these, but I do use them in game as well. So real quick before we transition into the decks that I worked with in the fellowship practice, I want to talk real quick about my tarot journal because I didn't actually put anything in this tarot journal this month. And the reason for that was because I was actually kind of playing around in a Hobonichi Cousins. I was trying to think which planner this was. I decorated the cover and, you know, was just playing around with it. You'll see that like it matches kind of my weeks a little bit. And I was playing with some different ideas for this. I ended up doing some like journaling stuff in here, and I was just like playing around with ideas and things I might want to do and funny layouts and whatever else. So I spent the month, here's kind of like a journaling page. I spent the month playing in this, trying to see if I wanted to maybe transition over into using a Cousins in 2025 in this way, where I have kind of like the journal and the planner kind of all in one. I didn't end up transitioning any of the readings over into my normal tarot journal, and like that's fine. October just isn't going to be in here, and that's great. I will probably make a note to myself in here why that is, so that if I'm looking back at this journal later on, I can, you know, see that I didn't put anything from October in here because I was playing in the Cousins. So that's why I don't have anything going to share with you in my main tarot journal, or just my journal this month, because that's what I was doing. I was playing in the cousins instead. I do, however, have my fellowship journal, which I'll share with you here in a moment after we take a look at the decks that I use and the dice that I use for the quest. So in October, we were in the Witch's Cottage, and I felt like it was appropriate to use a compendium of witches for that. So here's the backs of this deck, and I'm sure you've seen it before, but it's kind of divided into two sections. I do keep mine divided because I work with it in a very specific way, where I pull one of these witches and then I pull the symbol cards or element cards or whatever they call them. I can't remember what they call them, but I pull the additional cards for the messaging from the witch that's on the card, kind of similar to like Lenormand in that way. So this is like who's giving me the messaging or who's giving me the advice, and then the other cards are the advice that they're giving me. I really adore this deck. I pulled this to get my witch to see who is in the cottage. It's such a great one for this kind of an energy and this kind of reading. I ended up using this primarily as my loot deck. And because this deck sometimes just has like the thing on it, doesn't necessarily have a keyword in terms of like what it means. It's more of like hare. It's a rabbit, right? Is a hare a rabbit? Is that the same thing? I don't even know. But rather than being like a what it means, it's the what the thing is. And so that doesn't work very well for what we're doing with our loot. So I did end up getting into the guidebook and just kind of noting the keywords that were in the guidebook so that I could use those for the loot section of the practice. But this worked really well for a loot deck though, because all of the items and the keywords and the messaging really did relate really well to what we were doing in the fellowship. And I think the messages in the guidebook are really nice. They're very short and sweet, which I appreciate. We have like what the who the witch is. We have the couple of keywords around that. It talks about the witch, and then we have a little bit more about like who individually that witch is. And then for the, I went too far. This is your typical, is this low Scarabeo? Yeah, typical low Scarabeo where we have the multiple languages. But like this is plenty. This is all I need. So when I was doing these for loot, I would just get in here, and if I pulled the Cauldron card, then I would get new ideas, transmutation, and creation. I would write those three keywords down, and those would be my loot. But I'd also read the message just to see, you know, what it was talking about. And I think the messages are great in this book. I use this deck kind of in a very unique way. I don't tend to like pull it into just random readings as just like pull an oracle out and just throw a card in there. I use it much more intentionally than that, kind of using the witches and then using the elements or the items cards to help me kind of flesh out those messages. And I think it works beautifully for that. Okay, then we have the two main decks that I used for the practice for the readings. And these are the stunning Cottage Witch Oracle. I love this deck, man. It's such a great reader. This is by Krista Chronicles. If you do not know Krista, go check her out. I will leave her channel linked below. We've also dragged her into our BG3 Chaos, and she plays with Lisa and Allie and I in a game, which is fantastic. Here's the backs of her beautiful deck. This deck is amazing. I just love it. See, again, keyword, I see what it is. It's a fox, great, but we also have like a keyword that tells me what that fox represents. And I just think that that's amazing. Like this is just the best way to, I think, use an oracle, because like if I just had toad, I don't know that I would necessarily know what toad would mean to me. Shelter gives me a jumping off point, and that is such an interesting keyword for toad. It's not one I would have thought of, and I think that that's really cool because again, it makes me look at things from a different perspective. The art is stunning. The layout and the design of this deck is amazing. It works so well with so many of my decks. This is one of those really versatile oracle decks that I can pair it with just about anything, and it is amazing. I love it. B for teamwork. Love that one. And then I paired that with the Witch Sister Tarot. So here's the backs of this one. Now here's the thing with this deck. I really enjoyed working with it in the fellowship, and it was great for what we were doing for the month. Going into the Witch's Cottage, I feel like the energy was really great. But I really struggle with the change of the suit titles in this deck, and I don't know why it is. It really throws me every time, and I feel like this deck might actually serve better as an oracle for me. I may end up chopping the titles off just so that I can use it as an oracle, because here's my thinking. I really, really love this deck. I love the art. I love the energy of it. But my Tarot of the Hidden Realms, who's by the same creator, is a more readable, user-friendly deck for me. But I love this idea as an oracle because I feel like these were people or energies that wanted to talk to me. Like every time I pulled the card, I'd be like, this person, this energy wants to talk to me. And then I would pull cards around it. So as often I use my fellowship decks for other things than just, the fellowship readings, because they're out and about. So I will use them for other readings. And this was really fun. I really dove into this a little bit, just exploring this idea of, okay, I pull one of these witch sisters, and this is why I think I want to kind of change it into an oracle. And I would totally ignore whatever's going on down here. And I would just look at this entity, this figure, and what do they have to say to me? And then I would pull cards around it. I would pull additional tarot. I would pull oracle. It was just amazing. And I think it's because they're so focused on the face, on the person. And Tarot of the Hidden Realms is the same way. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it is the most stunning artwork. I absolutely love it. And I won't get rid of it because I think the artwork is absolutely amazing. But to me, that was just how it kept coming up for me, as I would get this card and I'd be like, okay, this figure wants to tell me something. So I was using it kind of in a similar way to how I work with the witch cards in the Compendium of Witches. It was a really similar practice because there's, 78 cards. Well, some of them are animals, but because there's 78 cards, there's more of them in here. And it was just beautiful. The Lovers came up for me once. So I used this as a focal point, and then I pulled a message from her and a message from him, and it was just beautiful. I really enjoyed it. And so I think I might just take it and turn it into an oracle deck because I feel like that works better for me. But it did work really beautifully for the fellowship too, using it as, fleshing out my messages, using it to get my readings and do the encounters, which is primarily what I used them for the activities. I use them all together for the whole reading, so I do the whole thing at once. It's divided into 3 parts, the initiative, the encounter, and the loot. And I sit down and I do each one every week all at once because that works better for me in the way that I'm going through the practice, but also just in terms of my time and energy, because I like to really dive into it and I want to really sit and take the time and I want to get the whole message fleshed out. And this works really, really well for that. And these together are just beautiful. I mean, even if we're using it as a tarot, it works beautifully as a tarot. I don't want to say anything about it not working as a tarot. It absolutely does. I used it successfully as a tarot all month long. But I feel like I just want to take it to that different sort of level for myself. I want to personalize my experience with it and turn it into an oracle deck. And I think that that's going to work really well for me. But these two together are beautiful. They really sit in alignment together. And I think that it's a perfect combo. I think that the focal point and the keywords on the Cottage Witch really help kind of give you something to lock into, and then you can use the Witch Sister to really expand upon that. And they're just gorgeous. I really, really enjoy them. I use the Cottage Witch a lot throughout the month too. That was just one that I got into for all kinds of things. I used it for daily draws. I used it for, taking a moment, taking a breath. I used it with other decks, other readings. It was great. I really, really enjoyed it. So the last deck that I incorporated in my fellowship readings was the Woodland Wardens. And this deck I used as my companion and my pet deck. So in the fellowship, if you so choose, we had come across a companion, so a party member that came and is traveling with us. Also, if we went to the Weaver's Fair, we adopted a Displacer Beast kitten. Throughout this adventure, we've had, people who've helped us, NPCs, non-player characters that help us throughout the adventure. And some of us have added the companion and the pet to our party, so we get to pull cards for them. So I used the Woodland Wardens this time. I have modified this deck. I edged it. I also micro trimmed it. So I left the border, but I made it smaller. So I just trimmed it down a little bit smaller. This deck is amazing. The art is beautiful. I love that we get the plant and the animal and the plant, and then there's a single keyword. I think that's really wonderful. It worked beautifully for pulling for my companion and my pet. I love the energy of it. It worked really well. It was beautiful in alignment on the table with all the other cards I had going on. this is just a great one to add to the reading. It creates a really great focal point, but also I feel like this one in particular works really well for like kind of a wrap-up message. And so that's why it worked well as the companion in the pet deck, because those are kind of like in addition to your reading, in addition to your message, they add their energy to the work, they support it, or in some cases detract from it. And it kind of, they relate to the things that support us or distract us and things of that nature within our own life. That's kind of what they represent. And like our displacer beast is often a little bit mischievous and gets into trouble and kind of is trying to pull our attention away from things, whereas our companion is really there to support us and help us along our adventure. And the cards tend to relate to that. So this is such a beautiful deck. I love it. It's a great animal deck. It, again, pairs beautifully with so many decks in my collection. And it's one that I tend to get into a lot towards the darker half of the year, because I feel like it just really sits in alignment with that energy. And it's a gorgeous one. So in addition to my decks, I had my dice that I used. And of course, I have all my other little accoutrements in here. I am missing a stone because I have to go get one. But I have all my little accoutrements that represent various things. My guardian, my companion, my displacer beast pet minifig is not in here currently because he's getting a little bit of a touch-up and his paint job from my youngest partner because he's way too small. I can't see him to paint him. I think I showed him last month, but he's off over at their house getting a little paint touch up because he got chipped. I have my Fate Changer coin in here and things like that. I did end up using the majority of the dice this month, I think. These are my Guardian dice, although I do occasionally use them for other readings. They're just the black and white ones here, which I show these like every single month. And then I have these sort of pearlescent white and gold ones, and I use these for my companion and other decks. So I use them for other instances. But the main dice set I used for this month is kind of this like coffee, I think it's like called coffee or something like that, coffee set. I actually have two sets of these because I have one that lives in my living room with my Carnival at the End of the World. We do play with it and do readings with it. I say we, mostly me, but Kevin tolerates it, right? I love these dice. They're amazing. I love the way that they look. I love the way that they work. It's just a cheapy Amazon set. Most of these are, I don't have a ton of fancy dice, but like I have a few very, very special ones. But these worked beautifully all month long. So let's wrap things up with a quick peek at my fellowship journal. This is the tarot journal that I did actually work in this month. And I record all of my readings, all of my encounters from the fellowship. As I mentioned, this month we were in the Witch's Cottage. There are no card images in here. I'm just doing, you know, some ephemera, some stickers and things like that. And it's mostly just recording my readings and what's been happening. I am also writing the whole narrative in here. So anything in cursive and brown is the whole story. So in here, I have the entire story to date. There's my displacer beast. There he is. That's Cantrip. Anyway, I have the whole story written in here so far, and I just record each week what my readings were, as well as the narrative, so the story itself, and then what I got and my experiences with the initiative, the encounter, and then the loot that I pulled. So it's really nothing fancy. It's mostly just writing and a little bit of doodles here and there and like stickers. That's primarily what I've been using, obviously a little bit of stamping. And I really just wanted it to be more about the story and the experience than the excess decorative stuff. So I really have been focusing on that with this whole book, and I love it. I think it works great. So just moving through all of our weeks, and then we're moving into our next month, which will be the Hearthside Haven, and that one's a really fun one. I'm really looking forward to that because we're going to meet a couple of people in this like little tavern, and it's going to be fun. So there you go. That is all the stuff that I got up to and worked with throughout the month of October. As always, you'll find links for everything I've shown here in the description box of this video. I hope that you had a wonderful October, and I wish you many blessings moving into November.